The Sparks Museum podcast is made possible by a grant from the Nevada Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. The podcast is just one of many new features of the Sparks Heritage Museum. To learn more, check out our social media channels or our website at www.sparksmuseum.org. Hello, and welcome to the Sparks Museum podcast. I'm your host and the media manager for the Sparks Heritage Museum, Jessica Johnson. On September 29, 1982, Dr. Lawrence Davis founded X-Trax, a recording studio located in the industrial district of Sparks. In January 2000, the studio rebranded itself the Imirage Sound Lab. The studio has been host to a wide array of musical talent, both local and national, but dedicates 90% of its recording time to supporting local artists. Today on the podcast, I sit down with Tom Gordon, a Northern Nevada local, USC alumnus, and sound engineer and producer with Imirage, who has been working as head engineer for over 2 decades. Please welcome to the podcast, Mr. Tom Gordon. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thanks for the invite.
First of all, I have to start by asking, what, if any, personal connection do you have to the city of Sparks? Is there a favorite location or event in town that you particularly enjoy?
Born and raised in Reno. Obviously, I was coming to Sparks growing up. And actually, the fondest memory of Sparks is going to the general store at the Nugget with the family on many a Saturday evening to have the barbecued ribs.
Oh, can't beat that.
That was a thing. That was a big thing. And those were the beef ribs, because if you went to Trader Vic's, those were the pork ribs. They're good. Nothing wrong with it. I think it might have been the same barbecue sauce, but general store had it. I'm telling you, that was the jam.
Oh. What do you do in your line of work, both in the studio and what you teach at UNR?
So I'm a sound producer, engineer, and educator. So I make records, and I teach people how to do the same thing.
And how long have you been doing this in your career?
Professionally for 31 years. I started when I graduated from the University of Southern California in 1991. I'm a Reno native, though, born and raised, went to USC to go to school, and then there was this amazing studio in Reno called Granny's House that was there for many years that I had miraculously landed a gig at right out of school, and was at Granny's House from 91 to 98. And in that period of time, it switched names from ownership and names from Granny's to Granny's House, from Granny's House to just Granny's, and then from Granny's to Sierra Sonic's Recording Mansion. And we used to joke that was the short name. The long name was Sierra Sonic's Recording Mansion and Milli Vanilli Memorial Salad Bar. And I was head engineer when I was Sierra Sonic's for 2 years, and then went freelance in 98 and struck out on my own. And I had recorded at the studio in Sparks when I was in high school, when I was 15, called X-Trax over on Greg and Linda. Knowing that was a studio in the area, I kind of knocked on doors around town to see who needed engineering help. And same owner, Dr. Lawrence Davis, who was our engineer in 1985, remembered me and said, hey, if you think you can book the place, we'll put some money into remodeling it. And we spent most of 99 remodeling, and basically end of 99, beginning of 2000, we reopened under the name Imirage Sound Labs. And I've been head engineer, manager, and head lead producer out of Imirage since 2000.
Wow. And where does that name come from, Imirage?
Ironically, it is a name that Dr. Davis invented for a friend who was inventing a perfume line.
Oh.
And he said it's the word image and mirage squished together. I'm like, interesting. And at the time, when we still had terrestrial phone books, he was very keen to have a name for the studio that was going to be the letter A. So we're the first ones in the phone book, and that's why X-Trax was called X-Trax first. And then there was this recording technology called ADATs that came out, ADAT. And there was a studio in town that advertised as ADAT 24-track, so they were always above X-Trax. And Dr. Davis was like, we got to come up with something. And we tried a whole different option, and we went back and forth for months. And then finally, Dr. Davis walks in one day and says, what about Imirage? We're like, it doesn't start with the letter A. I don't know, but it's this word I came up with for a friend's perfume that never got launched, and kind of like the word. I go, it is a good word. And then almost immediately, phone books kind of vanished. So the need for the first in the phone book wasn't as important.
Wow. Now tell me a little bit more about Dr. Davis.
Dr. Davis, the Rock and Doc, is the longest running commercial studio owner in the state of Nevada.
Wow.
He moved here from Minneapolis in 1977, I believe, after getting his degree in chiropractic, and started his chiropractic practice, which he now has had an office over on Moana forever next to Mogul Mouse, Davis Chiropractic. And he actually had another one here on Sparks on the corner of Prater and McCarran for many years too. And he wanted to record some of his songs and realized there's no studio here. I want to record songs. So he put together a partnership, and they bought some gear and created a studio in downtown Reno first called Sunwood. That was open from 78 to 80. And it's where the West Street Market is now in downtown Reno, where that Greek restaurant is, and I guess the wine bar's still there, but there's a few other places I've gone through. And for those 2 years, Dr. Davis had Sunwood there. And in 1980, that is where Lionel Richie and Diana Ross cut the vocals to Endless Love.
Oh, wow.
Because Diana was on contract with Bill Hara, performing at Harrah's, and if you were on contract, you couldn't leave town while you were doing your engagement. And of course, they had to have the song done immediately, so they flew up Lionel with the tapes, and the only commercial studio available then was Sunwood. So that partnership dissolved in 1980, 81. Dr. Davis took all of his toys out of Sunwood and found this location on the corner of Greg and Linda and Sparks. And there was actually a partner that had a video shop, which there was not many video people going on in 81, 82. So he split the space in half. The front half was Axe Tracks. The back half was a video spot. That video person ended up going somewhere else, and they expanded the whole place to be the studio.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, it's kind of interesting because, that area of town is the kind of Sparks is more industrial sector. Mm-hmm. And I was wondering if you see a connection between Imirage's mission and the projects that it develops with kind of Sparks' more homegrown, community-based growth and development.
Well, two angles to that answer. First off, like I said, it was at the corner of Greg and Linda, and I literally have a connection to the homegrown angle of that. We were recording a group with a gal named Milan Luna playing bass and singing, and she was like, I have this, one of the songs we're doing is about my mom who passed away, and her when she was young, in her 50s, and he said, and my grandfather was a land developer out here in Sparks, and in fact, they would name streets out here after their kids and stuff when they were developing it in the 30s, 40s, and 50s.
Wow. So
my uncle is he's named, one of the streets are named after him. My mom's named after one of them. And so what's your uncle's name? He goes, Greg. I'm like, what's your mom's name? Linda. I'm like, do you realize the studio you're at right now is on the corner of Greg and Linda? And she's like, no. And we walked outside, and you're like, oh my God, Linda's my mom. And the song we're recording is about her.
That is amazing.
And sadly, Milan passed away from cancer before she turned 50, 3 years later, or 4 years later. So that was horrible. But she brought her uncle over to one of the sessions, and I got to meet Greg, and we took a picture underneath the intersection of Greg and Linda.
Oh my God, that's
underneath
amazing.
The street sign. So, yeah, can't get more homespun than that, right?
Oh, absolutely not.
Wow, that's fantastic. Lazy Universe, that was the name of the band.
Hey.
That was the final name, Lazy Universe. So yeah, really remarkable musicians and good record and a lot of energy and spirit. The song she wrote for her mom was heavy. And timely. So then in terms of the vision of the spirit of the neighborhood, Dr. Davis has said since I went over there in 1999, which was the tail end of the grunge era, right?
Right.
And at that time, we had this very strong musical movement that was called the Seattle Sound.
Right.
With the grunge movement. And Dr. Davis is like, there's got to be a Reno sound. There's got to be a Sparks sound. There's got to be, a sound from this region. And that's something I had been trying to do with developing artists when I worked at Granny's house and had been continuing to do since taking over Axe Tracks, becoming Imirage. We've always been trying to find some local act to break and we've had a couple close calls, but no one's blown up the way that like the Killers have blown up out of Vegas.
Right.
The biggest artist that's come from Northern Nevada, arguably, is a classical composer, Eric Whitaker, who is the go-to for choir music now, and he wrote the overture for like the last Olympics in England, and he's a to-me model. He's just gorgeous, and he's talented, and he's from Washoe Valley, or no, he's from Minden area. And right, I went to music camp with him when I was in high school, and he's this international phenom now. But the only band that's gotten close was a punk band called 7 Seconds. They really had an international push in the early 80s, and they were touring with all the big names like Dead Kennedys and Sex Pistols and stuff like that. But now Kevin Seconds, the guy who started that band, lives in Sac. Kind of isn't here anymore. And the biggest other musician, I would say, now is a jazz musician that came from here. A guy named Brian Landris, who's a low sax player, bari sax, bass clarinet, bass flute, lives in New York now and has his own little label and is in Downbeat magazine every year in the top 10 lists of best players for those instruments. And so there are some staggering talent here. And I used to joke all the time, we have an enormous amount of talent per capita in this market because so many people moved here in the 60s and 70s for the steady work of the house bands at the casinos, including the Nugget.
Exactly.
And so that was way better than life on the road for a lot of people. They could settle down, have families, all that good stuff. So either those players are still in the area or they've had very talented offspring. Wow. So the amount of talent here is ridiculous. And now UNR's draw with our music faculty brings even more of them here. It's pretty great. So for a market our size, we're very fortunate with the amount of talent that's come here for music.
I was going to ask you about that, actually. It's a perfect segue because of the rare opportunity that we find ourselves in being in this region of being an entertainment hub of sorts throughout the different decades. And even though that's kind of ebbed and flowed throughout the years, the fact still remains that we have these massive performance centers, people coming and touring all the time. As you've seen it, could you tell us a little bit about the history of music performances and recording in this area?
Well, with touring, we have one distinct advantage amongst many disadvantages. When you tour as an artist, you're always trying to program your tours with logical next towns to play in. And on the East Coast, it's very easy to tour because everything's so close. Everything, the distance to go from Reno to San Francisco covers Baltimore to New York City on the East Coast with all these other great places in between. So Reno is kind of a perfectly centered spot between San Francisco and Salt Lake for on a lot of touring circuits.
Sure. So
if they want to insert a night in between those two big markets, if they can get Reno to show up, that can be a good fill-in. So we've had some good luck with some major tours that come along, but that really didn't start till the 80s. There were a lot of big shows that, I remember in the 70s going, oh, Kiss, I wish Kiss would play here. Are you kidding? My brother and I would be looking at the artwork of Kiss Alive too, and we were not a big enough market to pull that off.
Sure.
But now, they just had Kiss here at the Nugget.
They did.
And the Grand Sierra put them in the showroom there. So, we've definitely grown up as a town of entertainment that can facilitate the touring issues and the tech requirements. Because to tour with that equipment is not cheap. And some tours tour with their own, but a lot now will use whatever house sound there is. And for a long time, we didn't have the best facilities, and a lot of the local production teams have really upped the game. But with that's in terms of like outdoor venue concerts or hall concerts. Before that, when it was showroom stuff, when we were getting Rat Pack style artists, the Sammy Davis Juniors and stuff, that was the big appeal, especially the Nugget showroom and Harris headline room was the intimacy of that, because Sammy Davis or Rich Little or Liberace were used to playing these bigger venues in larger markets, but they liked the fact that they could see faces in the first 5 rows at these small rooms. And the owners, John Esquaga or Bill Hara, knew back then you had to treat your artists really well. So Bill especially would spoil the heck out of the artists that would come here.
Sure.
And let them stay at the Hara Mansion, let them pick out a car in the car collection over here in Sparks and drive around. I remember, so my dad worked for Bill Hara for many moons as a light person.
Wow.
And told me not to do lights. So here I am, not doing lights.
You're doing sound.
I'm doing sound. Exactly. See? Problem solved. And so, you know, I grew up in entertainment and visiting Dad doing shows, and, you know, met Sammy Davis Jr. at a midnight screening of a film that he did for the crew at the Granada downtown.
Wow.
Saw, you know, an advanced copy of Cannonball Run 2 with Sammy. And, yeah, Bill was like, what do you need? And I want you to, going back to the Diana Ross story, they didn't want them to want to leave Reno while they were here. You know, no, you want to go to the lake for the day? We have a car. We'll take you up there. You know, if you want to eat ice cream, Phyllis Diller used to go downtown to the Woolworths downtown and eat at the bar because when she's not dolled up, no one knew who she was.
Wow.
You know, and then it was a little getaway for these folks.
Sure.
And then my dad and I pulled up to Bill Cosby one day driving the Bugatti Royale from the collection.
Oh, my God.
You roll down the window and, Dale. And it's like, oh, hey, Bill. And I'm 7 going, he knows my dad's name. What the hell? Yeah. Long before we knew what Bill turned into. But the,
Sure.
The 80s, there were a lot of things we didn't know about. So the showroom stuff started first in terms of establishing a destination place. And even Sinatra got it and bought the Calneva in Lake Tahoe for 3 years from 60 to 61.
That's right.
And they would skirt the issue of gaming with that big room. So there's just enough table games to fill half that room.
Exactly.
So then the Nevada inspectors were going to show up. They'd push them all to the California side. Mm-hmm. And if the Nevada inspectors going to put the California side. But the shows that those 3 years, Frank's brought some folks up here.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And Mike Erdley of Tanglewood, one of my colleagues in town, was fortunate enough to get a collection of some of the gear that came from the room there, and including one of Frank's microphones that he has at the studio now. And it's like, wow, that's lots of history there. And I got some stuff from the Harris showroom. And we got one piece out of the Nugget showroom not too long ago at the university. So some of that gear is like, when it gets old, has no value, but some of it's kind of fun and cool and has vibe. So that becomes lore. And you can say when someone using it, oh, this was used by so-and-so doing so-and-so. So we have a showroom piano from Harris at our studio. My dad got in the 70s.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah. And then we ended up renting it to El Dorado a couple times too. So, you know, Ray Charles has played on it. Jerry Lee Lewis broke 8 keys on it.
Oh.
So, you know, that's vibe. And
yeah.
when you go into, really, I get to play a piano that Jerry Lee Lewis broke? I'm in.
Oh my gosh. No, and having been in Imirage as well, in many ways, it itself is a museum.
Right.
And I was going to ask you about that actually. In what ways would you equate a studio to a museum? And can you tell us about, I mean, that right there coming from Harrah's, that piano is amazing, but can you tell us about maybe 1 or 2 mementos or treasures that you
Sure.
have proudly on display?
Absolutely. And you know, when it comes to recording studios as museums, especially a lot of the vintage gear, they not only do they become hallowed ground because of certain people may have used it, but they just have a tone that a lot of people now spend unbelievable money for.
Yeah.
There are microphones that were used by Sinatra and the Beatles, and it's the same make and model. It's not the actual ones they used that were maybe $1,000 or $2,000 back then are going for $20,000 a microphone now. Because the tubes that are in them, you can't make anymore. There's mercury inside them. People would die trying to make these tubes again.
Sure.
So you can't get that sound anymore. So try and find working ones out there in the world. eBay has just shot all of these through the roof. So it's so some of the key pieces in recording studios that have that kind of appeal are these kind of vintage items that can't be replaced. And we have a couple nice pieces like that. One is a microphone that isn't a huge monetary value, but we got it from Ray Parker Jr. And it was an NKG The Tube, which is the kid brother of one of these Oh My God microphones I mentioned, the C12. But it was used by Ray Parker Jr. to record the vocals the Ghostbusters with. And sonically, what does that mean? Nothing. Vibe, everything.
Yeah.
People fight over who gets to use the Ghostbusters mic. And I'm like, really? It's that important to you? Okay, fine. You're welcome. Yeah. So, and then we have a 2-track reel-to-reel machine that apparently was purchased from Steely Dan. I wish I knew which albums.
Sure.
But yeah, anything with Steely Dan, because they are the final word in production quality. Those guys are the most anal retentive guys ever to make records. So the fact that it got under the limbo stick of their quality control, that says something. And then we have a 2-inch 24-track machine, which is where there's actually 24 individual lanes to record 24 individual instruments. That used to belong to David Stewart of the Eurythmics, the guitar player, writer of the Eurythmics. So it was their demo machine. Annie Lennox is sang on it. That's all I need to know.
Yeah.
Done. What else do we have? We have one of the channels from the original console that was from Sunwood in the early days of Axe Tracks. We've taken 8 of those channels and made what we call a sidecar, which is a side little mini console with just 8 of the channel strips. And the channel that Lionel cut his vocal Friendless Love is one of the channels we have there. Sonically, again, nothing, vibe, everything. But one fun piece is we have a collection of these old ribbon microphones from World War II era and a little after. And you've seen them on old newsreels, and a lot of old footage from the 40s of Frank singing into them, or Sarah Vaughan or Nat King Cole, before those tube microphones really started making their way in the late 50s, early 60s. In the 40s, a lot of these ribbon microphones were the way they went. And then they often would put the badge of the radio station on top, an NBC or a CBS badge on top of it.
Right, yeah.
Or there was another one that was kind of a pill-shaped, the RCA 44s or the 77s. And the pill-shaped one, the 77, ended up being like the go-to broadcast microphone. So you'd see that microphone on a lot of desks on talk shows. So the early years of the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson had one of those. And when Letterman first started, just as an homage, he had one on his desk. And then Larry King Live had one on his desk all the way until the end. And it wasn't working. It was just a prop because they had better gear.
Yeah.
But, it's like, oh, I recognize that pill-shaped 77. We acquired a prototype 77 from a friend of ours that needed work. It was missing the little fork that holds it, which is called a yoke. And when I sent it to a tech to work on it, who actually was an original RCA tech who was in his 80s at the time, he's like, "Oh, you got a 77B. This is fun." This was a prototype from the early part of last year, where we were in a technological race with the Germans on every topic in that part of the century. And they were the first ones to come up with a microphone that picked up what we call cardioid, 270 degrees. So the microphone we're speaking into right now picks up the front, the sides, but not the back.
Right.
And ribbon microphones was a thin, corrugated ribbon facing forward and backwards with magnets on the side, so it couldn't pick up sides, only the front and the back by design. And here comes Germany with 270 degrees, and the American engineers are like, "Oh, no, you don't. We're not going to take this sitting down." Yeah, okay. So they had to come up with a way of getting a bigger pickup pattern. They came up with a dual ribbon approach to try to get a wider space. Very expensive to manufacture, and they ditched it for a while. Went on to a different design, and then came back to the pill-shaped microphone more in the 50s. And you'll see lots of pictures of like Elvis singing into 77s in studios, or the Beach Boys or something. But not live. These were studio microphones for sure. This one was, both ribbons were shot. And it was missing the yoke, which was actually not the same size. It was shorter than the other ones. So we had to get a custom fork made. I'm like, dude, how much is this going to cost? He's like, calm down. I just opened it. It's serial number 3, which dates this microphone to 1936.
Oh, my gosh.
Yeah. So when Antique Roadshows was here, I was going to take it over to them. And I forgot. I missed it. I'm like, well, so much for getting the value.
But that's valuable.
Yeah, well, to the right person.
Sure.
Yeah, with that low serial number.
Yeah. Well, and thinking about items of value like that, when you were beginning to talk, it's so interesting how both in the museum realm and certainly in the objects you're talking about, how sometimes an object just has value attributed to it based on who owned it or who used it, as is the case with the Ghostbusters microphone.
Right.
Or the Reel-to-Reel for Steely Dan.
Right.
But also, especially when it comes to technology, and the fact that this technology in the grand scheme of human history hasn't been around that long, and we've already seen such massive technological changes. I mean, the fact that we can be sitting here right now at the Ant Space recording this podcast.
Right.
And
nice plug, by the way.
hey,
good job.
Right? You'll get one before the podcast is through. But the fact that we can be doing this right now was unfathomable a few decades back. And So I think that's such an interesting confluence that you have these antiques, for lack of a better word, in your space, along with state-of-the-art technology to record the sounds of today.
That is the irony. Yeah, that's this old gear that people would throw away would go, well, this has value? Seriously?
Yeah.
One other piece that there's a particular kind of organ called a Hammond organ, particular model, the B3, that was originally made in the 60s for churches that couldn't afford pipe organs. And it's a tube-powered thing with these tone wheels inside, and it has a rotating speaker called a Leslie speaker cabinet that employs the Doppler shift. Every time you slow it up or slow it down or speed it up, it changes the wobble. And meant for churches, but there was a power amp in it that was powered by tubes that if you turned it up would distort, and all the rock artists in the early 60s went, oh, what's this? And this became the rock keyboard. That's Give Me Some Lovin' from Spencer Davis Group. That's the band, and all these amazing keyboard players were driving these organs to distortion, Deep Purple, all that stuff. Okay, that's awesome. Huge, right? That was never meant to be a touring instrument, especially with the keyboard and a separate speaker cabinet. So touring in the 60s and 70s with actual Hammond B3s and Leslies was a pain in the butt. And here come the 80s with synthesizers that replaced it in this, a sound that was close. Did it sound exactly the same? No. Was it close? Yeah. Was it a lot lighter and easier on your back? Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
So people were throwing B3s away because it was not convenient. And now people are like, that was dumb. And we got our organ, let's just say, for well under $1,000 in the 80s from somebody who didn't need it anymore. And they sell for about $8,000 an organ now.
Wow.
In the condition of ours. It's insane how what is old is new again.
With that in mind, the museum has what we have dubbed Communications Corner.
Yes, indeed.
And we have several antique microphones, radios, as well as some vintage musical devices like phonographs and vitrolas, some of which you've actually inspected yourself.
Absolutely. I've given it the gone through.
Now, with your expertise in sound technology throughout the years, what other equipment or devices do you think are museum-worthy? And what technology of today do you think might soon end up in a museum that's already obsolete?
A marvelous question. So we were talking about those ribbon microphones.
Yeah.
There is a remarkable RCA 44 at the museum right now that I've never seen with this kind of bronze patina on it.
Yeah.
A special branding on it. I'm like, that's an amazing piece. I would love to plug that in and hear what it sounds like.
Oh my gosh.
We have one like it at Imirage, but I think that's a special model. And you can't do a trumpet a bigger favor than to put it on a 44 like that.
Really?
Yeah, that was made for those kind of brass instruments. So yeah, that microphone is kind of a jaw dropper. I'm like, how did you get that? And if you post it on eBay, people would lose their freaking minds. And it's funny, eBay dictates the value of all these things now.
Yeah.
Because before eBay, there were equipment brokers throughout the world that dictated the price of these things and the value. So this microphone, the Sinatra microphone that's here in town at Tanglewood, is a Neumann U47 is the make and model. And before, it was the brokers that set the value. Now, if there's a rich person in Texas who is a big Bob Dylan fan and sees all these pictures of Bob Dylan singing into a 47, with a very rich person in Tokyo who's a big Beatle fan and sees all these pictures of John Lennon singing into 47s. I've actually held the 47 that was used to record Let It Be when I visited Abbey Road. I'm like, that's a lot of money in my hand right now. And they would just start fight each other out because they have endless money. And then before they knew it, they doubled the price of the value of these. So if that's the model of how this is going to work, there will probably be some gear that came out in the 80s, some of this rack gear that replaced the real organs that had a sound that wasn't exactly right, but everyone fell in love with that one sound. So there might be there's some synthesizers from that era that people go bonkers for, the Juno synthesizers and the some of the Prophet synthesizers, these analog synthesizers that the new modeling digital synths don't sound the same of. So there will probably be some DJ equipment that came out in the last 10 years that people think, it's kind of big and clunky. There's now a new digital version that's more effective. And they'll go into 20 years going, that big clunky thing had a vibe.
Yeah.
It sounded cool. It wasn't the most user-friendly interface, but man, that sound, and that's the kind of thing that will blow up in the future.
Wow.
Is something that has a distinctive sound. Hence why vinyl came back and why, dare I say it, cassettes are coming back.
Well, like you said, everything old is new again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Speaking of new again, what kind of work is being done at Imirage today?
I'm in the middle of 12 albums there.
Wow.
And I have 2 second engineers are in the middle of a couple projects as well. There's a funk group called The Exchange that just did a tracking thing for an independent label there that my second engineers did. I just wrapped a feature film called Desert Shadows. They're doing mixing the film there. So we do like 80% music, 10% film, and the rest is like restoration, maybe some radio work. It's mostly music. Then a handful of local artists recording their own projects. But we've done, since I've been there, basically starting around January 2000, we have a collection of CDs in the lobby of all the albums that I've produced out of there, and we're around 250.
Wow.
And now add another probably 30% to that of digital release only that didn't have any physical product. So so we're probably well over 300 albums that I've produced for local or area clients since then.
That's amazing. And where would you like to see Imirage in the next 10 years, say?
Oh, well, that's a good question. We're trying to make it so there's a little less pressure on me to keep the place going all the time. Hence why I've been training some second engineers to kind of and do more work, because I've kind of had the place on lockdown for 20 years. And it's been on me to keep it going for 20 years in that regard. But at the same time, I now have more responsibilities elsewhere. I'm now split in thirds. I'm 2 days a week at Imirage, except in the summer. 2 days a week at UNR as the recording arts instructor. And then in 2 days a week, I work for Whitesnake. I'm one of their staff engineer producers at their own facility in South Reno. So I wanted the room to be able to keep going if I'm at UNR or working with Whitesnake. So because there's big time commitments on all of these.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, so having it where there's more engineers working out of Imirage, because what's a huge trend now is people, and I teach this, I'm kind of training my own competition in a way.
Yeah.
You don't need a room like Granny's house anymore to record an album. There was a day that was your only option because the big analog tape machines and the analog consoles cost a fortune. You couldn't put that in your home. The console we had at Granny's house was $500,000. The tape machine was $30,000. And now you can get everything in your laptop that did mostly what both those did for a $3,000 computer and $1,000 worth of software.
Yeah.
Right. But you just need the correct interface. It's the analog inputs and outputs are the Achilles heel of that system. So one thing you can't replace is a space to record certain things in. So right now we're in a room that's mostly deadened. There's acoustic treatments on the wall to prevent sound from reflecting back and forth to get rid of the ring. And that's good for certain things. It's terrible for others. Mm-hmm. So if you were to record a choir in a room this dead, they would hate you. They would go punch you in the face going, what are you doing to us? They're used to performing in cathedrals where there's many seconds of reverb that hold the notes out for them.
Right.
Right? So if you hear the Vienna Boys Choir in some, Notre Dame, right, with 12 seconds of reverb, that's astonishing. Bring them in here, it sounds totally wrong. And conversely, you wouldn't take Metallica and put them in Notre Dame. Well, for several reasons. But acoustically, that is a big one because as soon as they hit the bass drum twice, it's just going to become this din.
Yes.
So there's an art to the room design for the kind of instruments you're going to put into them. So a place to record drums is very hard to design without really building out a space. You really can't have parallel walls in a room for recording drums well and even vocals well. So we have a great sounding space, especially to record drums, and an amazing microphone collection. So having more engineers who are familiar with our room that can record stuff like the Hammond organ, the drums, all these things that they can't fit in their home studio, and then take the tracks home and do their post-production, that's kind of what we're kind of trying to move towards facilitating more. Having more engineers understand and have accessibility to the space rather than me hogging it.
And I mean, it sounds like your dance card is pretty full, and that you aren't.
I've been working 80 to 90-hour weeks for 31 years.
Ooh, and that you aren't wanting for work. But if there was a listener that was interested in recording with Imirage, how would they go about doing that?
Right. So best way is to actually reach me by email. If I'm available, cool. If not, I can work with to land you with one of our 2-second engineers, Mike or Alex, in the near future. So my email address is tom at inspired dash, not an underscore, but a hyphen, amateur.com. And that's my production company, Inspired Amateur Productions.
Excellent.
Because there's nothing more dangerous than the inspired amateur.
Very nice. Now, to end this podcast, I'm going to ask you what I call the big 3 questions. These are the questions.
No, I don't play basketball.
Oh, okay. Well, then
we're down to 2.
We're down to 2.
For those who don't know, I'm 6'8". So I'm sorry. Did that sound rehearsed?
Oh, yeah. So the first question is, what sparks you about Sparks? What do you think makes it an intriguing place to live, work, or visit?
So it's a bit of a dichotomy. Obviously, when they built the studio, it was a little more cost effective to put a business there than Reno. I wasn't there for that decision, but I know that was the case. It's really quiet for what we do, and this is very common for recording studios in cities like LA or New York, where they're built in a building that's hidden because you really don't advertise. You have that kind of gear hiding there. Yeah. So we just vanish perfectly. And there were some other studios in the same neighborhood for a while for the same reason. And, an industrial area that was like, okay, no one bugs us. And it's awesome. I don't want to jinx anything, but we've been very fortunate with the security out there. And if there was ever an issue with a false alarm, Sparks PD was on it.
That's amazing.
And before I could answer the phone, they showed up. I'm like, "Are you charging us?" Damn it! I should have picked that up sooner. Anyway, and then it was nice when I had get accommodations for clients coming to town. 5 minutes from the airport. Hello.
Yeah.
Easy. That was an easy one, and getting them a room at the Nugget usually worked out really well, and I liked being that close to the Nugget for a few reasons, for shows and meals and stuff like that from the studio. Plus, the big history is a little known fact about the Harrah's Automobile Museum, the original location in Sparks, which is a stone's throw from the studio. For you Rush fans out there, there's a song called Red Barchetta. And when Rush would play here in the 70s, the drummer, Neil Peart, my hero, the reason I do what I do, would love coming to see the Harrah's Automobile collection out there, and wrote a song about one of the cars, Red Barchetta, which was a Ferrari Barchetta that was there. And when he came back in 97 on a motorcycle tour, he saw the new museum, which is very nice, but 1/10 the size of the original.
Sure.
And he's like, and the Barchetta was gonna. And I was reading his book where he explained all this. I'm like, the Red Barchetta was in Reno, in Sparks, a mile away from my studio this whole time. If I knew that growing up, I would have been camping.
Oh, of course.
At that museum. So
Wow.
Great history there, and a huge nerd factor for Sparks history there. So every time I have a client come in town, I'm like, "Are you a Rush fan?" They're like, "Yeah." I gotta show you something.
Yeah.
No way. It's in the book. And the book's in the lobby at the studio, so they can. I'm not making it up. See, it's right there. Now, obviously, there are there's no place is perfect, and the biggest downside has been the flooding. We're right in the floodplain, and I was told by someone who took the tour with the museum recently, they're finally doing something about clearing up the water downstream from us, so hopefully we won't be dealing with the floods again. But that we've had to sandbag like 4-5 times since I've been there.
God, and with the amount of equipment and electricity in there, no.
And Dr. Davis was there for the flood in '97. But one thing, whoever the developers were, my hat's off to them, because our building is like a foot higher than any other building on that street or in the neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
So even in the 100-year flood, where everyone was actually getting water in the building, it came to the front door at our building and didn't come in.
Oh, that's great.
So, yay.
knock on wood that continues.
Yeah, exactly.
And what is your favorite either personal memory of Sparks, or if you have a favorite historical story, anything that you can think of?
Growing up here, obviously Bertha and Tina was a big part of the family outings, and I remember seeing Bertha and Tina open for a few acts at the showroom, and we went to the house to see them in the elephant house.
Yep.
And seeing the only elephant crosswalk in the world. That was pretty amazing. And I was actually at the Nevada Day Parade where Bertha killed a dog.
Oh.
They spooked her. So
wow.
She had to get therapy
yeah.
too. And what they ended up doing is having a dog in the elephant house with them. So they got used to having them around.
Oh, that's good.
But
Ooh.
Some innocent bystander lost a dog that day.
Wow.
And because it just hit Bertha the wrong way.
Well, dog versus elephant.
Yeah.
Elephant wins every time.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Our odd times. And then there's always, I still have one of the little golden rooster pamphlets.
Oh.
Because that story is just too insane not to keep.
Yeah.
And I took a lot of clients over there and see this chunk of gold shaped like a rooster? We're the people dumb enough to do that.
Yeah. And lastly, kind of spoke about this in terms of what is museum worthy, but yeah. I was wondering if there was any item that you personally own or are aware about that you think belongs in a museum, or specifically the Sparks Museum. Well, and you have lent
the golden
us.
rooster for one. would really make sense in the Sparks Museum.
Oh, absolutely.
I know of various things in people's private collections that I actually can't divulge that would really need to belong in museums, but they're like, nope, that's mine. I'm like,
Oh, sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
understand.
Yep.
Man, that's a tough one because, yeah, there's a lot of things that people would consider museum worthy at our studio that, yeah, that's a tough one.
Well, I think things that are museum worthy there that probably should stay there.
Yeah.
Just given the building's history. Yeah.
Well, that, and we're using them.
Of course.
You
Yeah.
know, we all these items that we've gotten, we've fixed up so they can be used. We have a 1919 Victrola there that I got fixed up, and I demonstrate that to every person who walks around comes and takes a tour. We also have an Edison player that I have yet to get fixed up, but I will, because I teach this stuff and I explain the history of Victor Talking Machine versus Edison and the feud between the two of them, and this is a visual aid.
Wow.
And boy, there are other items, but I just
no.
Either I can't talk about them, or I can't. Yeah,
provided a wealth of information today. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Hopefully, I didn't talk your ear off.
Oh no, and this is all very interesting information. And thank you so much for sharing so much about Imirage. And good luck. Yes.
Wait. So Imirage is about to turn 40.
Oh my gosh!
It's the longest running commercial recording studio in the state. It opened September 29th, 1982. And we are having its 40th birthday, September 29th, 2022. And so there'll be some event that we're still developing right now. That'll be a Thursday night. We're going to be informing the masses.
Wonderful.
So a rare opportunity to come see the facility for those who aren't musicians who are like, wow, that sounds like a cool place. Too bad I can't, I don't play an instrument. Well, here's your chance to actually come see it without having to book studio time.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for sharing that. And hopefully we see a lot more from Imirage in the next decade.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah.
The Sparks Museum podcast is funded in part by a grant from the Nevada Humanities and the National Endowment for the Humanities. It is produced and recorded at the podcast recording studio at Sparks' own AntSpace Co-working Entrepreneurial Hub, a place for entrepreneurs, made by entrepreneurs. We really want to get the word out about our brand new audio series, so please spread the word about our new podcast by taking a moment to rate, review, and share this episode. Do you have a favorite story of Sparks that you want to hear on the podcast? Email info@sparksmuseum.org to share any recommendations. We would love to hear from you. We also invite you to visit the Sparks Heritage Museum on 814 Victorian Avenue. The museum is open Tuesdays through Saturdays from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Please come visit and be a part of our ongoing efforts to tell the Sparks story. We'll see you next time.